All right, glad to have you back. Donald Trump's return to the White House sparked many reactions across the African continent, including Nigeria. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu went out of his way to send his best wishes to Donald Trump on his re-election as President of the United States, marking him as the 47th person to hold the position. President Bola Tinubu expressed high hopes for enhanced synergy between the two countries, particularly as both face a range of global challenges. Trump's approval ratings in Nigeria with research shows that they are low despite his bluntness in many cases. Many Nigerians are opposed to his anti-immigration policies, but Trump did acknowledge Nigeria's importance in Africa. For instance, he made President Muhammadu Buhari his first African leader to call him in 2017 during his first term. Nigeria saw some gains from Trump's transactional foreign policy. The country may benefit from increased trade or investment, particularly in industries like oil and gas, if those align with U.S. interests. On the price of crude oil, President-elect Donald Trump's policies is aimed at boosting domestic oil production in the U.S., which led at the time to oversupply of oil globally, contributing to a decline in oil prices. Nigeria, heavily dependent on oil exports, felt the strain of reduced revenues. Let me bring in Babajide Atolagbe. He's a senior portfolio manager with AfriInvest West Africa. He joins me for more on this conversation. Good afternoon. It's good to see you.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yep. I'm sure you heard my introduction and you've seen where I've taken you to what happened even before now. What is your overview of Trump's presidency? Let me ask that way. I think we can start from there and I can pick some other questions what's your overview? What are your expectations?
Well, for Trump's second presidency, I think regardless of the noise around the election, the noise around what we expect, I think the most constant thing is the theme or the message, which is essentially to make America great again, right? And looking at that, we must contextualize it from, where the America is currently coming from and what type of pivotal changes he wants to make to the economy, to other areas of America in order to make America great again. So essentially what makes America great is the economic prowess in terms of trade, in terms of its importance in economic activities across the world, and also in terms of its strategic placement in terms of global politics. And from Trump's view, from the message he has been, from his disposition prior to the election, he is of the opinion that America has been badly led in his words, right? And he's looking to revamp all those, core American, dream in terms of economic and in terms of strategic power. And he has expressly stated that his policies will be centered around economic revamp in terms of, raising tariffs, protectionism, pro-American economic policies, and also ensuring that, corporates in the U.S. enjoy taxes. He has mentioned economic independence, which you rightly mentioned, and we also have a view that he is going to maintain America at the forefront of, geopolitics. So these are his primary area of interest. I must also mention his policies around immigration, wanting to ensure that America is not a dumping ground for unproductive migrants. So these are some of his disposition, and what we take from this is very simple, just to put America first. And I like the word you use in terms of transactional, foreign policy. He's going to maintain a transactional foreign policy disposition throughout his term. All of his, policies would be centered around, putting America first again. And we've started seeing that from his nominations, right? This is very, very simple. We think he's just going to pursue all of this very vehemently, and is going to make sure that, in his words, make America great again.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, I intentionally use the word transactional because we need to know where we are, where we stand. And that's particularly with the oil and gas industry. And many are worried, and I want to take you back to that if there is increased production in country, that might cause take us to have a glut. And when there's a glut, We have issues with pricing and all of that. I don't know how this comes to you, but do you think that it could have any impact on global oil prices?
Well, yes, it has certainly has a material impact, or it will have a material impact on global oil prices because the dynamics behind the oil market is largely from a commodity perspective, whereby demand and supply is the essential driver of of prices, right? And when we look at the last 2 years, that there's we've registered like an imbalance between supply and demand, with supply outweighing demand, right? And the only instance whereby demand and supply has been threatened, areas where we have geopolitical concerns. So without geopolitical concerns, we have an imbalanced oil market whereby supply outweighs demand, right? And when we question what is behind demand, I mean, the overall picture is, of course, the global economy is slowing on the back of the war, pre-pandemic recovery and all of that. But again, the bigger picture is China. China is absolutely nowhere to be found in terms of global political and economic discussion. And that's because of the domestic challenges that China is currently experiencing, stemming from the real estate, stemming from weak demand, and stemming from, political, issues. So China is, one of the major factors why that imbalance exists. Now, when we have a Donald Trump presidency whose primary disposition towards energy is independence, right? We might have a situation whereby that gap expands because in his first tenure, he was very bullish on production of U.S. shale oil, right? We saw production rise astronomically to record levels, and that played a significant impact in the oil market, right? In fact, it created some sort of, of challenge for the OPEC countries and even for the OPEC, organization, because the numbers that the U.S. were churning out on a monthly basis were very, very material, and it became clear that Donald Trump is interested, or was and is still interested in making sure that America is also a major voice in terms of the energy market, right? So when we have Trump, second term, still chasing that kind of agenda in a market whereby there's a supply glut, right? It only means that the difference between demand and supply may be, widened, and it's going to be in favor of supply. And that's not good for prices because China is not showing any prospective, sign of coming out of its current economic hole. And the rest of the world is also not in a great situation economically because many countries are grappling from inflation, unemployment, and, this excessive, policy tightening across the world, right? So it's going to lead to a situation whereby that imbalance is widened and prices would be, negative. And in terms of price negative, all countries of the world now have to, pick up their strategy sessions to see where they can have the positives and where they can have the negatives.
I'm just going to add that even the Dangote refinery, before I move, looking at trade barriers that we might also see, because some say trade relations might become more restrictive under Trump's administration. Do you think the Dangote refinery could also shape anything with regards to the crude to the oil market?
Well, in terms of scale, the global level, I do not think that the refinery is going to play a significant impact at the global level. But domestically in Nigeria, what the Dangote refinery largely promises Nigeria is what the Dangote refinery promised Nigeria is availability, not necessarily availability in terms of pricing. So we know that the refinery is churning out product that is very close. The proximity to the consumer is just a stone throw from from the market. But in terms of pricing, we're not so certain around the outcome of the engagement between the NNPC and federal government and the Dangote refinery. So in terms of how it will shape our domestic economy, yes, it could help us in terms of production. which will contribute to GDP, of course, and employment and all of that. But in terms of inflation and its impact on the general cost environment, I think that area still remains very gray. In the event that they're able to sort out, have a mutual and a lasting understanding between the government and the Dangote refinery, at least whatever price, mechanism is being agreed on would give business leaders and policymakers clarity in terms of being able to plan and being able to comfortably plan that energy prices will follow a simple or a common pricing mechanism. So that area is still sort of gray, like I mentioned, and we'll need more clarity to decide how far and how less it can affect the Nigerian economy.
Great stuff. Now, Trump might also, of course, he will strengthen the dollar, trying to improve his countries. He must strengthen the currency. And we know what's happening already. Our Naira is getting a big bash from the greenback. Now, let me ask you what that means for borrowing countries like us, debt servicing, if that happens.
Well, let me say that for US, it is great, again, because that is something we've mentioned, making America great again. What gives America its relevance is the power of the currency. So Trump is really going to emphasize on that, right? Meanwhile, for other economies, particularly developing economies, and much more centered on Nigeria, it's not an exciting story, right? Because now that we are currently grappling with so much pressure from the currency in terms of inflation, in terms of how it affects production of goods and services in Nigeria, right? And with Trump definitely going to push for a pro-dollar, that would mean that that would lead to it could potentially lead to imported inflation in Nigeria, and that would also mean that the CBN now has some sort of bigger fish to fry in terms of their approach and their approach towards quantitative tightening in order to save the face of the naira. So it's not something that is friendly for Nigeria. On the cost perspective, it is not friendly for Nigeria. Imported inflation, also the fact that it could impact our borrowing costs, because our dollar-denominated debt now is currently around 121, billion dollars, right? $121 million, right? Which is very, very, very high. And we need to make sure that we are monitoring the cost, cost side of things for the federal government, because revenue accretion has always been an issue. If we can't find a way around managing costs, right, it simply means that the government finances may be exploded. So a higher US dollar is not good for Nigeria, but we have to find ways in which we can ensure that the naira remains competitive, and that is largely tied to productivity.
Some would also talk about Nigeria's looking at an alignment, or they expect an alignment with regards to international conflicts. Look at what is happening in Ukraine, Gaza, and all of that. Do you think that also has any impact on our trade relations?
Well, historically, in terms of Nigeria's foreign policy disposition, Nigeria has been practicing non-alignment for a very long time, right? And something that we should credit the government for, because you don't want to be necessarily involved in the power between the East and the West. So Nigeria has always followed the non-alignment movement. In fact, we're one of the founding members of the non-aligned movement back after the Cold War. And irrespective of what party that is in government, I think the non-alignment continues to remain sacrosanct, right? So in the modern geopolitical environment of the US, the Russia, and the other countries trying to also emerge, I think Nigeria is still going to maintain its non-alignment policy, at least in public. And that will ensure that they are not at the receiving end of the opposition blocks and what have you. But in terms of in private or outside the public arena, Nigeria would still ensure that their policies, their alignment should be tailored to countries that are likely going to impact Nigerians. And Nigeria and the government has done that in different areas. In terms of loans, Nigeria has gotten good loans from Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank and IMF. And in terms of cheap infrastructure, quality infrastructure, Nigeria has been much more aligned to the East, which is why we see a lot of Chinese companies, being much more involved in the construction of infrastructure in Nigeria. So I think our foreign policy has been really, really decent, and it is something that the current administration must ensure that they watch out for subsequently.
So before I let you go, now, what are the prospects and opportunities in this relationship if well structured? I'm talking about Nigeria and United States relationship.
Yes. So I think so. We've been asking ourselves that, okay, we know that Trump's presidency is all about a transactionary approach. So what are the areas Nigerians or the Nigerian government can, what can we offer to the rest of the world that, in terms of value, right? I looked at the commodities. Well, in terms of our major export, which is oil, Nigeria is not necessarily a net exporter to the US, because when we look at the our balance of trade in terms of export and import, the US is barely 10% on both the import and the export. So maybe our oil is not necessarily a final destination in the US space. But in terms of, I think the area where Nigeria can really benefit from is in terms of human capital, development, right? So Nigeria has a very large market of a large market entirely, right? In terms of, entertainment, in terms of, global employability, in terms of, technology. So Nigeria has a rising, population, that is skewed towards this emerging, trend at the global level. So if we can really project our strengths and our prospects in this light, I think in terms of migration, mobility of labor, and also to a very large extent mobility of capital into Nigeria, we can center our value proposition around these key sectors. Those are areas I think the government can be very, very proactive on.
I must thank you so much, Senior Portfolio Manager, AfriInvest West Africa, Mr. Babajide Atolagbe. Thank you so much for your contributions to the programs today. We really appreciate this.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine.
All right. Well, it's time for us to review trading activities at the Nigerian Exchange Limited. And I have Mr.